Thank you. Good morning. It's still morning. What I'm going to be talking about is making everything work the same way as much as possible, obviously. And this relates to stuff that Paul talked about, and Mark talked about, and Jeff talked about. So some of this you already know. Okay, basically what we want to do is make everything look the same way so that we don't have to think about it as much. Here are a bunch of typical controls. And let us pretend you wanted to clear the control so that the user can enter new data. And this is what you'd have to do. And this is the code that does that. It's stuff that we've all written a lot, probably. And this is what I'm going to talk about to clear the controls. And basically, you have a little loop down here. Yeah, okay, good, because and you basically loop through all the controls and tell them to clear themselves. And this is what things need to get done. And you all know that already. Okay, I said all controls will return strings, and all controls will implement a class interface. And by making all controls implement a class interface and return strings, all the controls now look alike. As far as your code is concerned, there's only one thing. I've called it RDD control, but that's what it is. And you don't have to think about what it is. You stick it on the screen, give it some data, and everything just works. And this is a class interface. I think Mark taught us all about class interfaces yesterday. And to make a class interface, you insert a class interface. And this is what the RDD control interface looks like. It has all these methods. And also, all of them have to have some properties. It would be nice if a class interface could require properties in some way, but I'm not sure how that would work. And there's a little joke here. This is a reference to Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's instead of enabled, because there's an enabled property in it, and you can't reuse the property. Okay. Here's how we make them editable. We just go through all the controls in the container. I'm always using containers. And we go through all the controls, and if it's one of our kind of controls, we tell it to edit itself. And this is how we make them ready to accept new data. And these are the properties. There are two critical properties. Well, they're all pretty useful. Each control can have a label, and we'll see how the control finds its label in a minute. RDD column is the column in the database where the control is getting its data or saving its data to. RDD valid is simply a string that indicates the kind of validation that should be done. Required is if the control requires input. And these are entered in the IDE because Xojo has this very clever system where you can actually add public properties can be available in the IDE. And that's what, so here's our RDD column. This is an email column, and this is the validation it has. Okay. All right. All the looping stuff is in a container, and it does all this stuff by looping through all the controls and telling it what to do. By the way, each container represents a single table. So you can have multiple tables, multiple containers on the screen, if that's what you need to do. And each container represents a table.
A table or a column?
What?
A table or a column?
A table. A container represents a table.
Okay,
The controls represent columns.
Okay.
And I'll show you where you put that stuff too. All right. The collect controls method in the RDD container does a bunch of nifty things. And what it does is this. Is that readable? Okay, good. What it's trying to do here is find out if it loops first through all the controls, and if it's a label, we stick it into a little dictionary. And the labels, the value is the label, and the key is the control's name. And if it's a control, we stick it into an array. Okay, having done that, and here's where the magic happens, there's a naming convention. Everything starts with a 3-letter prefix. So labels are LBL, and text fields and text boxes are TXT, etc. And what I do is I rip off the 3-letter prefix of the name of the control, stick LBL on it, and then find out if I have a key for that label. And if I do, we call setLabel, which basically, here's the control, and we pass the label in from the dictionary. Now, setLabel does a couple of things over here on the right. It's very common to use an asterisk at the end of the label to indicate that something is required. And so that's what I do. And setLabel looks to see if there's an asterisk at the end of the label, and if it is, the control required property is marked true. And now the control knows its label. There's a kind of control called an RDD tech box, and those are basically invisible. They're on the screen, but nobody's supposed to see them, except occasionally the developer, which is why this. And what that is for is, excuse me. What that is for is to put in things like the ID of ID number of the row that you're going to be saving to. Because when we save, we basically loop through all the controls. I know this is boring. Always looping through all the controls. And we, so if everything is on the screen, we don't have to do anything special to handle things like that, or a modified date or entered date. They're on the screen, but the user doesn't see them, and I usually shove them down in the corner somewhere. But occasionally, you as a developer might want to see them, so there's a way of turning that on. And here's the naming convention. Okay, the validation This is typically the stuff I validate. Well, I validate other things too, but this is really standard stuff that everybody validates all the time. And so there's a class that knows how to do these kinds of validations. And what it does, when it's just before you're saving, you call the RDD valid class and pass it the control. If the control has its valid field property filled in, it checks to see what kind it is and does the appropriate validation. And for those of you who are not in the US, I'm sure you can figure out how to do validation for postal code. And this is what validation looks like. Again, all we're doing is looping through all the controls. Do mark right here turns the label red because the control has its own label. So you don't have to go anywhere and figure out what's talking to who. It's just there. And we return the error, and then it gets displayed to the user, and they can go fix it. All right, typically, this is the stuff that gets stuff from the table. The table, this is a method in the container control. You've probably figured out I've subclassed the entire world here. This is a method in the container, the subclass container control, and we simply go through everything, and if we do our query, and then we are simply looping through everything, and through all the controls, we get the column from the control because the control has that property that we put in the IDE called RDD column, and if it's empty, we just continue. Because sometimes you got something on the screen that doesn't go to the database. That's fine. Anyway, if you have a value, you simply set the value right here because the row set column call is the column in the database, so we just grab that, and since everything's a string, this works. And saving is basically the same thing, backwards. It's possible you have a container that doesn't have a table. We just bail. Okay. Well, this is going awfully fast. It's all right. Session. We learned yesterday about the session object in web apps. The session object in the web app represents, in effect, a single user. So if you want things that are global to a user but not the entire application, you stick them in the session object. So for mobile and desktop, I created a module called session. And it holds the stuff that typically would be in the app object. But now it's in the session object, so it doesn't matter whether you're doing web or mobile or desk. There's a session object, and that's where you get all your global stuff. And now, so everything is really as similar as possible. Okay, this is a very cool feature of Xojo. Once you have your framework, library, whatever you want to call it, set up the way you want it, save it as a binary project, and copy the file into the project templates folder in the Xojo folder. And then, when you open up to start a new project, you pick templates, and you can grab, oops, we didn't want to do that. you can simply grab the, in this case, desk project, and all your code that you've spent weeks, years putting together to make your environment productive is instantly available. It's the way to start a new project. And I only learned this recently, and I've been doing this a long time. Oh, we're done. That was fast. Yeah, this is just, you can just read this. Okay, so I'm going to do a little teeny demo, and then we can go to lunch.
Are we going to get the countdown?
You want the answer to the cow joke?
Yeah.
What games cows play? They play musical chairs, they play parcheesi, and they play truth or dairy.
You missed patty cake.
What?
Patty cake.
People tell me Monopoly, and I don't like that one either. Let's do the demo and we can do more cow jokes. I have about 70 cow jokes. And I've been doing cow jokes at the State Fair for like 9 years. Okay. Let's see, we want to push this button here. Let us pretend you have a desktop application and you want to make a mobile application on an iPad. And I'm actually working on a project like that, assuming certain technology excuse me, will work. Okay, here are a couple of labels. One that says desktop label and one says RDD label. And I'm going to copy them, Command C, and I'm going to paste them. Now, the RDD label shows up and it will work, even though the superclass is different, because everything is an RDD control. The desktop label shows up down here and you can't do anything with it as far as I know. So it's not every day that you need to do this. I've also tried this with web stuff, and I think it works. At least it worked on Web 1. The other thing we want to do, so I mean, I thought that was rather cool, actually. We can get rid of this. The next thing we want to do is actually build a screen. And I think I have to put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Here is the container control. And it has a couple of properties, RDD table and RDD key call. So remember, the container represents a single table. And so when you stick it on the page, you can set the table and the name of the key column. And then you don't have to think about it again. And what we need to do is get a text field. Everywhere. Now that's not the right kind of text field. That's a standard text field. So we're going to call this text name, and we're going to make it an RDD text box. That's a P. And now it knows about stuff, and here's our two properties that we've added to the control and made them available. And let's call the column here fname, and now we need a label. We don't want to do that here. This is wrong. We want to do it here. There we go. So we'll do it again. Text field. And that would be the name field. And now we need the label. And let's use the label that we've got here. And so this has to be LBL name. And it's going to say name. And we want it required. And so you do that. Now we need the ID field on here because otherwise things are not going to work. And so what we do is, I just copy another one. And, oh, it's right here. How clever of me. No, that's a state. Okay. Oh, I always require the user to type in the two-character state abbreviation because I really detest those long pop-ups. Okay, this is text ID, and it's an RDD tech box. And ID. So that won't show up to the user. And to a large extent, that's the scope. Boy, this doesn't take any time at all. Well, that's because once you've got this thing built, assembling pages like this is really, really fast because you're not writing any code. It's all there. And it's kind of quasi-half-baked, but it's going to be available, so you can mess around with it. And the two secrets are subclass all the controls and make them all implement the same interface, and then everything works. Let's see if there's something else. Oh, that's it, in case you want to find me. Questions? No, I bored everybody. Yes?
On the second slide, on the right corner was never use checkboxes.
I never use checkboxes. Why do I not use checkboxes? Because
Maybe I know the answer.
you can't tell if the user didn't check it or didn't see it. You have no way of validating. So if I need to know if something is a yes, no, I have a segmented control that simply says yes, no, and they have to pick something, because sometimes you want to force the user to actually make a decision, and a checkbox won't do that for you. And the reason this happened is that the Salud system stuff is respirator screening, and I can explain that if anyone's interested, but the point is we wanted to force everybody to make a decision about various possible medical decisions. So we couldn't just say, check it if you've got it. No, we made them say yes or no.
Sorry, I have another question.
Well, we can have a discussion then. What do you got?
For each container, is a file or is a table?
Each container represents a single table.
Table. Can it represent also a view?
Can it represent a view? I haven't tried that.
That is,
But I mean, in effect, a view is sort of an ersatz table for outside the database. So theoretically, it should work, but I don't. I haven't tried it. Okay. Well, maybe you want another cow joke. Where do cows invest their money? Mutual funds and municipal bonds. I think that's probably enough.